Elijah felt the words land and rearrange themselves into something that sounded efficient and wrong. "Mercy isn't a campaign," he said. "It's a door left open when a man gets home late." Vanessa's eyes softened, but only for a breath. "Then, let's put hinges on more doors. The clause I added to the operating memo allows me to suspend non-essential field payments during regulatory review. It protects us." He heard the word she didn't say aloud. Us meant the entity, not the faces in the notebook. "Who decides what's non-essential?" he asked. "I do," she said, "until the board votes a new policy." The sentence sat there between them, bright and sharp. Elijah looked down at the black and white notebook on the table. Inked lines waited like people in a clinic. That afternoon, the cost of delay took shape. Miss Erlene's lights went out. The refrigerator hushed and gave up its steady comfort with a click that sounded like a verdict. She moved milk and leftover greens into a cooler, packed ice around them as if love could last under plastic. "We'll make do," she told the grandchildren, and smiled with tired gums. On the north side, Mr. Hines called from the depot. The bus he drove had been his pride until the engine coughed itself into silence last week. The foundation had promised a bridge loan to get him back en route. Now the depot said there was no engine and no loan. He walked home in the heat, his shoes talking to the pavement with each step. Across town, Aaliyah stood at the registrar's window with a cashier's check that didn't matter. "Your grant is flagged pending compliance," the woman said, eyes on the screen. "You can keep your place with a deposit by Friday or defer to spring." Aaliyah nodded, as if nodding could change the date on a policy. She thanked the woman for her time because her granddaddy had raised her to show respect, even when the room didn't return it. Outside, she sat on a hot metal bench and stared at the campus lawn where two freshmen threw a frisbee too far and laughed like tomorrow was cheap. She texted Clarence one sentence, they froze it, and turned the phone face down in her lap so it wouldn't show her its pity. Back at the office, Malik brought in a stack of reconciliations. He didn't dramatize, he just pointed. The hold touched everything with a fine hand. Rent stipends at risk, medicine funds paused, utilities set to shut off one by one. Elijah listened until the numbers stopped sounding like numbers and more like rooms getting dark in order. He made a mistake then, the kind men make when a dam gives way and their hands reach for sandbags they don't own. He wrote 2 personal checks and sent a driver with cash to cover Miss Erlene's past due and Mr. Hines's engine deposit. He meant to be helpful, quick, quiet. He told himself it was neighborly, not official. He told himself the line between personal and program was clear because his heart knew why he crossed it. Vanessa found out before sunset. She didn't yell. She placed a printed memo on the table and tapped the bottom paragraph. "Self-dealing," she said softly, as if naming a diagnosis. "That's how the city will read it. You paid beneficiaries during a hold from an account that shares a name with the foundation. The review officer will say you undermined the process. Do you understand what you've given them?" Elijah closed his eyes. He understood too well. Good intent didn't inoculate a man against consequences. He had taught that lesson to young founders for years, and now tasted it without sugar. He reached for the checks to pretend they could be undone and found only his own empty hand. By early evening, the story turned mean. A local show with a pleasant title and sharp teeth ran a segment that took the porch video and cut it into something else. The voiceover called Elijah a savior and Clarence a symbol. They spliced a still image of Clarence mopping a hospital floor with a shot of keys glinting in the sun, and asked without asking if the whole thing had been a stunt. A tagline slid across the bottom of the screen like a whisper from a mouth that always asked for more. Who profits from quiet justice? Elijah stood in his living room and watched his jaw answer for him on a screen he could not talk back to. The phone started in on its noise. Friends promising support. Enemies borrowing the criticism for their own use. Strangers offering advice he hadn't asked for. He turned the volume down until the words lost their edges, and then turned it off. Silence has a way of making a man's heart amplify. Clarence didn't call. Aaliyah texted late, Granddaddy's taking a walk, and added a heart she didn't feel like drawing. At dawn, when the neighborhood woke, he was not on his porch. His rocking chair sat like an empty hand. The marigolds held their color, stubborn and bright, as if they had not read the news. Elijah went to the house. The street had that early-hour honesty, when nobody performed and nobody hid. He knocked once and then again. No answer. Aaliyah opened after a minute, her eyes puffy from sleep, or from what stands next to sleep when it won't come in. She let him in with a small nod and a smaller smile. He left before light, she said. Didn't want the cameras to find him first. On the kitchen table sat Clarence's composition notebook, open to a page Elijah hadn't seen. The handwriting was his same steady walk, but the words had changed direction. If goodness is a show, I won't be the stage. Quiet is not silence. Some rooms still remember us. Find me where the floor knows our names. Under the lines lay an old hospital visitor badge, the sticker kind that doesn't stick well after a day. Mercy General. Date faded. The corner curled like a leaf drying on a windowsill. Elijah held the badge between finger and thumb. He heard the echo of a bench near a vending machine, the hum of lights, and the click of a chapel door that never latched clean. He looked at Aliyah. She looked back as if she knew what he would say before he said it. "I'll bring him home," he said. She breathed out like someone setting down a weight. "He'll come when he's ready," she said. "Just don't bring a camera." Elijah nodded. He slipped the badge into his pocket as if it were fragile and stood a moment longer than manners required, listening for the small sounds that tell you a house will forgive a man for leaving. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner and pulled away. The morning had not yet decided if it would be kind. He stepped off the porch into a day that wanted an answer and carried the line that had finally named his mistake. In trying to fix the river, he had stepped in the way of its flow. On the sidewalk, a half-full water bottle caught the sun and threw it back at his shoes. The cap was tight. The label had bubbled where heat touched it. He picked it up without thinking and felt the simple weight of what had started all this. Then he walked toward Mercy General, toward a chapel with a floor that had kept his mother's footprints and had not forgotten his own. Chapter 6. Point of No Return. He found Clarence where the note told him to look. Down the quiet corridor past the vending machines, in the chapel that never locked right, on a pew close enough to the aisle to leave if the past got too loud. The room held that hospital hush that doesn't come from rules, but from the kind of pain that has learned to whisper. A single lamp burned near the altar. The air smelled like wood polish and the paper of old hymnals. Elijah stood in the doorway until the stillness accepted him. Clarence didn't turn. He had his hat on his knee and both hands on the hat like it might float away if he forgot to hold it. The man looked smaller in this place, not because he was diminished, but because the room made everyone the same size. "I knew you'd come," Clarence said, eyes still forward. Elijah stepped in and took the pew across the aisle. "You left your badge on the table," he said. "That was a map." "Wasn't for you to chase me," Clarence answered. "Was for you to remember why you started walking." Elijah let the sentence sit in his chest. He looked down at the carpet where years of shoes had pressed a path darker than the edges. I made it about fixing, he said, and about me. I told myself I was just moving the water around. You don't get to move water in a river without changing the banks. Clarence breathed a quiet yes. Goodness don't like a stage, he said. You tried to cover people while the city threw shade. That part was right, but you did it your way, not the way you promised. That's how you get lost. Elijah nodded. He felt the old pew press between his shoulders like a hand trying to keep him upright. There was something else he wanted to say and didn't want to say. He let it come anyway. When you told me your name, he said, Washington, it rang in a place that had been empty a long time. My mother kept a letter with a line inside it I never understood. Tell him marigolds are braver than roses. She never said who the him was. I'm not here to draw family trees where they don't grow. I'm saying sometimes the Lord lays a word across two men and waits to see if either one can carry it. Clarence turned then, slow, and studied Elijah like a man reads a weather map. We ain't got to be kin to share a lesson, he said, and the edge of his mouth lifted. But if we are, the Lord will say it in his own time. The chapel door eased open. Pastor Jerome stepped in and let his eyes adjust to the low light. I figured you two might find the same room, he said, taking the pew behind them like a referee who also loved both teams. I brought something you'll like and something you won't. Elijah likes truth even when it scratches, Clarence said. Good, Jerome said. The neighborhood will hold a listening tonight. No cameras, no mics, phones in a basket, church, clinic, school at the front. If this is going to be ours, it needs our hands on the wheel. And the part I won't like? Elijah asked. Vanessa's been on the phone since sunup, Jerome said. She's got 3 board members and 2 donors ready to call you reckless. They want you sidelined until the review clears. They're using your checks like a hammer. He paused, then added, I also heard from a deacon whose cousin interns for a PR shop in Atlanta. Something about Eastline. He said, tell your man to check his mirrors. Elijah let the words line up. Mirrors meant angles, not answers. He pulled his phone and found a new text from Malik. Drop by when you leave the hospital. No email. He slipped the phone away. Tonight, he said, I read out loud what we've kept in folders. Every dollar in, every dollar out. My mistake in ink big enough for the back row. Then I ask the room to vote the keys. Church, clinic, school. We hand the veto to the people who have to live with the choices. That's not just brave, Jerome said. That's binding. It has to be, Elijah answered. If we keep this under my thumb, I'll ruin it trying to save it. Clarence watched the lamp along beat, and then stood with the careful strength of a man who knows where his pain lives and how to carry it. I'll walk in with you, he said. But you do the talking. I already had my say. They left the chapel together. The hallway lights hummed. A nurse nodded at Clarence like he still belonged to the place. Outside, heat took their names and put them on its tongue. Elijah drove straight to the office on Farish. Malik was waiting in the doorway like a quiet alarm. Paper, Malik said, pressing a slim folder into Elijah's hand, and something else. Inside lay the state registry prints, the bank traces, and a single flash drive taped to a note that read, Delivered by courier, no return address. Elijah didn't like gifts without names, but the day had already given him worse. He slid the drive into his laptop. A waveform opened. A woman's voice rose from the speakers. Clean, professional, familiar. We can position Quiet Justice as a licensable platform, the voice said. Founder is mission-driven and susceptible to pressure under compliance review. If naming rights are packaged as protection, he'll sign. We keep his face for warmth and take the steering for scale. Vanessa. Not spliced, not stolen from air. Recorded on a call she had believed was private. Elijah felt his ribs go tight the way they did when a lift took too long to reach his floor. Malik watched his eyes the way you watch a man carry a heavy thing. "There's a timestamp and a caller ID buried in the file," Malik said. Eastline's junior account manager must have had second thoughts, or a conscience that woke up late. Elijah closed the laptop and pressed both palms to the cover, like holding it might keep the bitterness from spilling. He had wanted this to be a misunderstanding he could forgive without bleeding. Now the cut had shape. He could stay quiet and handle it in a boardroom. He could go public and scorch everything. Both paths cost souls. Jerome stepped in, as if he had been standing in the hall and heard the weight in the room shift. "It's time," he said. They walked to the church at sunset. The sanctuary was already full. Fans clicked in slow rhythm, shoulders touched shoulders, and the air carried that mix of sweat, perfume, and expectation that only black churches know how to bless. Up front, 3 tables faced the pews, one for the church, one for the free clinic, one for the school. Between them sat a 4th table with nothing on it but a glass of water. Elijah took the 4th table. He didn't sit. He stood and let the people see his face without the comfort of a dividing line. "No speeches," he said, "just facts and a question." He read, not from cue cards, from ledgers, from the notebook. He named dollars and dates and vendors. He spoke his mistake plainly and didn't try to soften it. He said the city's hold had turned help into a waiting room, and that he had tried to pay 2 bills with his own hand when he should have let the process be the process, or change the process in the open. He looked at Aaliyah where she sat 2 rows back, and let her see that his pride had taken a knee. Then he lifted the flash drive and set it on the table. "I have a recording," he said, voice steady. "You deserve to hear it, but I won't play it until the room decides whether we fix in private or clean in public." He turned to the 3 tables. "Church, clinic, school. Do you want full daylight or a closed door and a quiet firing?" Sister May from the church stood first. "Daylight," she said, and her hand didn't shake. Dr. Bennett from the clinic stood next. "Daylight," he said, "because sick people don't heal in the dark." Principal Harris from the school stood last, glasses low, tie crooked. "Daylight," he said, and he smiled a small sad smile like a man choosing surgery over pills. Elijah pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the sanctuary, smooth as business, hard as a blade. Nobody yelled. The sound settled, heavy and instructive. When it ended, the room stayed quiet long enough to feel the edges of what had been done in their name. Vanessa was there, 3 rows from the front, chin high, jaw set like she had counted these seconds before she walked in. She stood and faced the people she had tried to work around. "I wanted to make it bigger," she said. "Bigger than you, bigger than him. I came from nothing. I thought scale was salvation. I was wrong about what to sell to get there." Jerome lifted his palm, not to hush her but to hold the next words. "We won't stone you," he said. "We will not keep you at the wheel. Both things can be true." Elijah spoke the only sentence that mattered. Effective tonight, control of this work moves to a community trust with 3 keys. I resign my vote. I remain a donor without a say. If 2 of the 3 keys turn, it opens. If 2 turn against, it closes. That is the price of keeping this clean. He waited for someone to argue, to call him dramatic, to say the city would eat them alive. The choir loft rustled. A child coughed and was shushed with love. In the back, Mr. Hines shifted his weight from a tired foot to a foot more tired and nodded like a man whose bus had finally arrived. Clarence stood then, not for show, just because his body understood the moment. He walked up the aisle with his slow, sure steps, took the glass of water from the table and held it with both hands. "This never belonged to me," he said, the room leaning forward to hear an old man tell the truth. "It belonged to whoever was thirsty next." He set the glass back down. It clicked against wood, a small sound that carried to the doors. Elijah looked out at the faces that would decide who got the next key, and something inside him let go of a crown he hadn't wanted in the first place. He had crossed the line he could not uncross. The day had asked him if he meant what he said about doors and hands and who should hold them. He had answered in front of witnesses. As the meeting broke into committees and prayer and side conversations, Malik touched Elijah's elbow. "One more thing," he said, voice low. "The state sent a second notice while you were on your feet. The review officer wants to meet tomorrow. They saw the live stream a volunteer shouldn't have run, and they want to talk compliance and governance." Elijah almost laughed, the tired kind. "Good," he said. "Let them come to a room with keys." Outside, the heat had loosened its grip. Night climbed the trees and sat there like a choir in dark robes. On the church steps, someone had left a plastic bottle half full, the cap turned tight. A folded note taped to the side. Elijah peeled it off and read by the light from the vestibule. "For the one who needs it next. Don't let us forget." He passed the bottle to Clarence. The old man tucked it into the crook of his arm like a newborn, and looked down Farish Street where the streetlights made small moons on the pavement. The neighborhood wasn't quieter. It was clearer. And clarity, Elijah knew now, was the point you couldn't come back from even if you wanted to. Chapter 7. The Crest of the Storm. He walked into City Hall carrying every mistake he could fit into a folder and a half-full water bottle in his coat pocket like a small stubborn truth. Morning light fell through the atrium glass and made hard edges on the floor. The elevators chimed as if time had manners. Elijah didn't look up. He followed the hallway signs to compliance and opened the door to a room that smelled like paper and waiting. Loretta Tate, head of Municipal Review, sat at the end of a long table with a legal pad and eyes that had seen too many men ask for exceptions. She was a black woman in her 50s, not impressed by names and less impressed by noise. To her right sat an assistant with a laptop. To her left, two city attorneys stacked with statutes. Folding chairs lined the wall. They weren't empty. Pastor Jerome had come with his Bible and his calm. Dr. Bennett from the clinic had brought a file of unpaid invoices like prayer requests. Principal Harris held a manila folder full of students' names written in careful teacher script. Malik stood near the back, hands clasped. Clarence took the last seat by the door with the slow grace of a man who lets rooms meet him on their own time. Aaliyah sat beside him, chin up, eyes steady. "Mr. Brooks," Ms. Tate said, voice even, "thank you for coming. This is a preliminary conference. We'll ask questions, you'll answer, we'll determine next steps." "No cameras," Jerome said, not as a question. "No cameras," she replied. "This is city business, not a show." Elijah placed the folder on the table and did not sit. "I'd like to begin with what I got wrong," he said. "Then I'll tell you what we've changed, then you can tell me if it's enough." He named it plain. He described the hold, the pressure, the 2 checks he had written from his personal account while the city's freeze was in place. He didn't dress the choice as mercy or call it a gray area. He called it what it was: impatience, a bad habit that wears a good coat. He slid the receipts across the table and kept his hand there, palm open, like a man not hiding a thing. "And what have you changed?" Ms. Tate asked. He handed her the trust charter. "Governance moved last night," he said. "This work is now controlled by a community trust with 3 keys: church, clinic, school. I'm out as a voting member. I remain a donor without a voice." She read the 2 pages twice, slow, lips moving on the hard lines. A veto provision, she said. Unusual. Necessary, Elijah answered. It keeps the work where the consequences live. Miss Tate looked over her glasses. You understand you've given up power you cannot get back without a fight you won't win. I understand, he said, and meant it. The city attorney cleared his throat. We still have the question of the complaint that triggered the review, he said. If the origin points to solicitation without a permit or to misrepresentation, the freeze stays. Elijah slid a thin flash drive onto the table. You'll find part of your answer here, he said. There are vendor records and a recording. The vendor is Eastline Strategies. The voice is my former operations director. You'll hear plans to package this initiative as a licensable platform under compliance pressure. Naming rights, branding, steering. The assistant plugged in the drive and tapped keys. The room filled with a clean, measured tone. Vanessa's voice, professional and bright, explaining how to take a door meant for porches and hang it in a boardroom. When the audio ended, nobody exhaled right away. People did not gasp. They adjusted in their chairs and let the truth settle where it wanted to sit. The second city attorney flipped through papers. The complaint email, he said, tapping a redacted printout, originated from a domain controlled by Eastline. The subject line matches the fragment in your notice. Quiet justice is branding. Miss Tate set down her pen and looked toward the wall of folding chairs. Is Miss Price present? She asked. Vanessa stood. She had come, dressed in dark gray with her hair pulled back tight as a decision. I'm here, she said. Do you contest what we heard? Miss Tate asked. No, Vanessa said. I thought I was protecting the work by growing it fast. I told myself story and scale were the same thing. I filed the complaint because I wanted control. That's the truth. It was the wrong room to be brave for applause. It was the right room to be honest for repair. Vanessa didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't cry. She looked at Clarence and then at Aaliyah and held their eyes without flinching. I'm sorry, she said. Not in a press way. In a kitchen, table way. Clarence nodded once. Aaliyah didn't move. She didn't owe anyone her quick mercy. Miss Tate made a small note and turned the page. Here's my determination, she said, voice carrying the weight of something final. The city lifts the freeze contingent on this trust structure being filed and recorded by close of business tomorrow. Disbursements tied to personal checks are to be documented and reimbursed to the donor from his own funds to prevent commingling allegations. A compliance monitor will sit in on the first quarter of meetings to ensure process. Any further attempt to license or brand the program without trust consent will trigger a formal injunction. She looked up. Do you agree, Mr. Brooks? Yes, he said. Do you agree, Pastor, Doctor, Principal? They each said yes in a voice that sounded like duty, not delight. Fine, Miss Tate said. Then go pay your light bills and your engines and your tuition. And don't make me see you in here again for anything but a holiday donation. There was a small ripple in the room, not applause, just the sound people make when a stone lifted off a chest. Vanessa placed her badge on the side table and left without drama. Some doors you close yourself so they don't slam on you later. Outside, the sky had sharpened to a clear blue that made trees look like they had been painted. People drifted down the city hall steps in 2s and 3s. The hard part wasn't over, but the water had moved again. Elijah stood on the 4th step and let the sun find his face. He felt older and lighter in the same breath. Walk with me, Clarence said. They turned the corner and took the block slow. Traffic hummed like a hive settling after a storm. Clarence reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope, the kind that held bills or secrets. "This is something I should have handed you a long time ago if I'd known how," he said. "Didn't have a way to reach you. Didn't even know your name back then." Inside was a copy of a letter, yellowed at the edges. Elijah recognized the slant of the handwriting even before his eyes found the line that had lived in his pocket for years. "Tell him marigolds are braver than roses." Below it, a sentence he had never seen because it sat 3 lines down, folded under in the original. "If he ever comes back to Jackson, find Clarence at Mercy. He'll know why." Elijah stopped walking. The street sounds dimmed. "She wrote this to you," he said, voice smaller than it had been in the hearing room. "She did," Clarence answered. "Your mama was my baby sister, stubborn and shining. She didn't want you growing up with promises she couldn't keep, so she kept quiet about some names. I stayed out her way, like she asked. Then I waited wrong. I'm sorry for that waiting." Elijah held the letter like it might turn to ash if the wind took it. The old ache in his chest, father, money, expectation, shifted to make room for a new ache that had a face and a porch and a laugh he remembered from a kitchen where grits were stirred slow. He didn't say, "Uncle." He didn't say, "Finally." He did what men do when truth arrives late and right. He put his hand on Clarence's shoulder and stood there until both of them could breathe as if they shared one lung. "You gave me water when my soul was thirsty," Elijah said at last. "I did what a man does," Clarence replied. "The rest belongs to the Lord." They walked back to the steps where Pastor Jerome was already organizing people into the kind of clusters that turn decisions into action. Clinic table here, school forms there, church volunteers to the left, utility receipts to the right. Miss Erlene held her light bill in one hand and a paper fan in the other. Mr. Hines had grease on his palms and hope in his eyes. Elia stood with a registrar envelope and a stubborn smile. Elijah took the bottle from his pocket and set it on the top step, cap tight, condensation making a small ring on the stone. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. The trust representatives met under a shade tree and turned 2 keys for disbursements that should never have been paused. Money moved with a sound too quiet for microphones, the scratch of pens, the rip of checks, the click of stamps. People exhaled in real time. Loretta Tate passed by on her way to lunch and nodded. "Keep it boring from here," she said. "We'll try," Jerome replied, smiling like a man who knows the church never lets a week stay boring. As the crowd thinned, a young mother with a stroller climbed the steps and paused beside the bottle. She read the small note someone had taped there and smiled at nobody in particular, for the one who needs it next. She didn't take the bottle, she just touched it and kept moving. Not everything needed to be claimed to matter. Elijah stood with Clarence a while longer, both men watching the city remember how to breathe. The day had given them a twist that would take time to name in full. Family had stepped out of a shadow. Power had stepped into a smaller circle. The work had stepped back onto the porches where it started. The sun slid a little west. A wind picked up and rattled the leaves like applause you hear from behind a door. Elijah looked at the trust table under the tree and knew he wouldn't sit there again, not as a decider. It felt like loss and felt like freedom. In the distance, a church bell tested one note and let it hang. Some truths asked for lights. This one had asked for witnesses, and the room had obliged. Chapter 8. Echo of the Story. By October, the heat had stepped back a little and let the city breathe. On Farish Street, the pecan trees started dropping their hard green shells like slow applause, and the trust table under the biggest branch grew nicked with use. They met there twice a month even when it rained. moving indoors only if the sky refused to negotiate. Church, clinic, school, the three keys, sat together with clipboards and coffee in paper cups. They didn't talk about vision first. They talked about bills with due dates and faces with stories. They posted decisions on a corkboard in the vestibule, written by hand in the same careful block letters Malik used in the ledgers. It looked like Clarence's notebook had stood up and learned to share. Each line carried 4 parts: date, name, what was done, what was returned to the world. Returned wasn't always money. Sometimes it was hours volunteered, or a spare room offered to a cousin who had run out of couches, or the promise to mentor a boy who needed a man to show up 3 Thursdays in a row. They took that column serious, not as payment, as circulation. Water only stays sweet when it moves. Miss Erlene's refrigerator hummed again, steady as a church alto. She sent a pound cake to the trust table and a note that read, "Your kindness didn't melt in the heat." Mr. Hines was back on Route 12, driving the morning shift with a thermos and a new habit of waving at every kid at every stop. Mr. Lionel kept fixing bikes in his yard under a white tent someone donated, a jar on the table with a slip of paper taped to it. Leave what you can. Take what you need. The jar never ran empty or full. It just stayed ready. Aaliyah wore pale blue scrubs most days now. She split her time between nursing classes and evening hours at the free clinic. On Thursdays, she sat at the triage desk and learned the soft art of asking tough questions without making a person feel small. She still had her chipped glass at home, and still placed it just so at dinner, because some losses turn into anchors if you let them. She smiled more in October than she had in August, not wide, but real. When she passed the pecan tree after clinic, she checked the corkboard without fail, reading the names like a litany. One night, she found her own in the returned column. Trained 2 elders on blood pressure cuffs. Stayed late to mop. She hadn't told anyone. Someone had seen anyway. Vanessa stayed away for a while. She sent a short letter through Malik with no logo on top, just a date and a line that said, "I'm learning how to work without a stage." 2 weeks later, Aaliyah saw her at the clinic in plain clothes, sorting boxes of donated inhalers, hair in a messy bun, no makeup, no talking points. She didn't announce a comeback. She stacked and labeled and left before closing. People watched her the way you watch a dog that once bit you and now lowers its head. Trust didn't return on demand. It came the way rain comes to stubborn ground, slow, then steady, then in puddles that surprised your shoes. Elijah lived smaller on purpose. He stopped taking meetings in rooms with glass walls, stopped saying yes to panels with clever names. Most mornings he drove a van that smelled like cardboard and soap. He learned how to back it into tight alleys without scraping a bumper. He carried boxes to porches and listened for dogs. He was still a wealthy man. There was no use pretending otherwise. But wealth had taken off its crown and put on work gloves. People reacted different now. Some nodded because they recognized him. Some didn't look twice because a man in a gray t-shirt lifting a box is nobody special. Those were good days. He spent Sundays with Clarence when he could. They sat on the porch with the marigolds and let the street pass in pieces. Kids on scooters, a couple arguing with love still in the room, a deacon waving from a Buick with a dented door. They didn't talk about family every time. When they did, it was in short pieces a man could swallow. Clarence told a story about Elijah's mother sneaking 2 extra biscuits into her purse after church for a neighbor's boy who never took seconds when offered. Elijah told a story about breaking a cheap keyboard with his elbow and crying into a towel because he thought he had broken the whole future. They didn't rush the new blood between them. They just let it do what blood does. One afternoon, They took a walk down to Mercy General. Elijah had avoided the place even after the hearing, as if going back would wake up a ghost he had laid down careful. But Clarence wanted to plant something there, and when an elder asks you to bring a shovel, you don't come empty-handed. They stood by the chapel door that still stuck and then gave, and they put their trowels into a patch of dirt that had never been asked for anything more than holding footsteps. Aaliyah joined with a bag of seeds. Pastor Jerome brought a jug of water and a blessing too short to impress anybody and too strong to forget. They planted marigolds along the base of the wall, small and stubborn in their orange and gold, heads already lifting toward a sky that had nothing to prove. "Your mama would have loved this," Clarence said, wiping his forehead with a folded handkerchief like men do when the work is decent and the day has earned its sweat. Elijah pressed his palm to the dirt and let it cool his skin. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The ground kept the story. The flowers would tell it when folks walked by with bandaged hands and new diagnoses and the kind of tired that doesn't show on scans. The city kept its monitor at trust meetings for 1 quarter, and then sent a short email that said, "You're boring again." It was the kindest line of the year. They framed it and hung it next to the corkboard where the ledgers lived. Children pointed at the word boring and laughed like it was a bug that had died upside down. Near Thanksgiving, a storm came out of Louisiana fast and rude. It ripped shingles, flooded ditches, and knocked out the lights in 3 blocks, including Miss Erlene's. The trust table didn't wait for forms. The church opened its basement and cooked spaghetti for 50. The clinic set up cots for folks who couldn't climb stairs. The school gym turned into a charging station with outlets labeled in duct tape. Elijah drove the van back and forth until the gas light blinked, then siphoned from a mower to make one more run. Vanessa showed up with a box of headlamps and a silence that fit the room. The keys turned without argument. Help moved like a well-drilled choir, no solos, full harmony. On the second night of the storm, a young man knocked on the church door after midnight, soaked through, shivering. Aaliyah answered because she had been doing inventory and had lost count 3 times. He said he had been sleeping under an overpass, that he saw the light, that he wasn't asking for money, just somewhere dry. Aaliyah handed him a towel and led him to a cot, and then walked to the vestibule and poured a paper cup of water from a cooler set on a folding table. She carried it back and set it in his hand like a sacrament. He thanked her without looking up, drank slow, and fell asleep with the cup on his chest. In the morning, he folded the blanket in a square and asked if there was a broom he could use. She put one in his hands. He swept the gym floor like a man checking a promise. December brought cold that bit ears and made breath visible. The trust had its last meeting of the year under the pecan tree anyway, coats zipped to chins, fingers in gloves that didn't match. They wrote the final line of the ledger in thick pen so it wouldn't fade. December 20th, community, kept the lights on. Returned, sang together at the end, and they did. A hymn rose off the tree and drifted up Farish, and even the cars passing slowed as if to not run over the sound. Elijah stood in the back and let the song find him. He thought about all the rooms he had walked into with his name leading the way, and how heavy that banner had been when he was tired. He thought about the day in City Hall when Miss Tate had told him to keep it boring, and how that had felt like Grace dressed in a pantsuit. He thought about his mother's letter and the line that used to feel like a riddle until the day it didn't. Marigolds were braver than roses because they didn't need to be invited to a vase. They made a show on a curb and called it good. After the meeting, Malik locked the ledger in a cabinet with a squeaky hinge. Aaliyah switched off the space heater with a toe. Pastor Jerome stacked chairs with the rhythm of a man who had built a life out of stacking chairs and unstacking them again. Clarence took Elijah's arm as they walked toward home. "People think the miracle is money," Clarence said. "Money is a tool. The miracle is folks trusting each other again." Elijah nodded. "Trust doesn't clap," he said. "It holds." "Exactly," Clarence answered. "And holding is harder work." They reached the porch where the marigolds held on against the cold, like small suns, stubborn for a while longer. On the top step sat a plastic bottle half full, cap tight, with a note folded under the ring. Elijah picked it up and passed it to Clarence. The old man opened the paper with the careful hands of someone who had learned not to tear what carries meaning. 3 words, written in a neat, unfamiliar hand, looked back. "For tomorrow's thirst." He smiled and tucked the note in his shirt pocket next to the handkerchief. They didn't ask who left it. Some gifts don't come with names because they belong to the neighborhood more than to any one set of fingers. Elijah went inside and turned on the lamp his mother had bought at a yard sale on a day when they didn't need a lamp, but needed the feeling of buying something that wasn't a bill. The room warmed a little. He stood by the window and looked out at the street that had once felt like a wound, and now felt like a scar that had learned not to ache every time he touched it. In the quiet, he heard the soft sounds he had asked God for when his life was louder than his soul. Water in a pipe, the low laugh of a neighbor on the phone, a radio 2 houses down finding the right station, the creak of Clarence's rocker under steady weight. He pressed a palm to the glass and let the cool meet the heat of his skin, and in that simple meeting found the whole lesson again. Sometimes a man thinks the work is to build a river. Most days it's enough to carry a bottle and to know who needs it next.